Okay. James, do you want to complete our presentation?
Sure. Um, so they've got geographically separate teams and the two for the two ERPs and the three monitoring systems. Um, so they'll need some strong central governance here to ensure that all the teams are following the same standards, best practices, convention, design principles, processes, etc., to align the schedules and tooling and make sure everyone's on the same page um, and is following a consistent process. Uh, to note here, that's also a highly regulated industry, as mentioned. So we definitely want legal compliance and InfoSec within our COE to be consulted. Um, there's only one dev and one test environment here for these aforementioned systems. So we need strong communication between teams of who's doing what in which environment and when to avoid conflicts. And we need to reuse these environments for multiple purposes. For example, continuous integration and maybe also other types of testing, UAT, etc. And they want sales management wants a big bang release in 4 months. We would want to try to negotiate a phased release and an MVP approach to this whole effort. And we want to set realistic expectations of what's possible in a 4-month time frame. And we need also the steering committee to make this project the top priority for the company. There can't be other, if we're going to do this in 4 months, there can't be any other projects competing for priority. They wanted recommendations about design issues, team management, etc. So methodology will be waterfall, agile, hybrid, waterfall overall to try to meet that aggressive deadline, ensure that testing starts early enough. And then also for integrations, for a contract first approach, which will enable parallel development. And the rest of the team, Scrum teams will use Agile so they can iterate quickly, do demos, get feedback, learn about issues early, shift left. And then we'd use Jira for requirement traceability and prioritization at a tactical level, whereas the steering committee will be the overall priority at a strategic level, and also the vision. We'll have a COE under that, legal, compliance, InfoSec, IT, business units, POs. They'll facilitate standards, communication about what's going on in the company, enablement, facilitate buy-in and alignment, and also adoption. ARB, Architecture Review Board, will evangelize design principles, the style guides, handle code review issues and escalations, and provide coaching. PMO will manage the schedules, remove blockers, escalate any delays to the steer coast because of that aggressive time frame. Change control board will prevent scope creep and also communicate changes that will be happening. Here's all the Scrum teams. I won't name them all, but they'll be doing daily stand-ups and a scrum of scrums for inter-team communication. Environment type and testing type here along the top for our environment strategy. Devs will develop in Scratch orgs and do unit testing there, commit their built features to GitHub, open pull requests, which will trigger static code analysis by code scan. And then that'll also trigger a CI deployment and test with Travis CI, deploying to a build environment, which is a dev sandbox that'll do automated regression testing there. They'll also, if those tests all pass, we'd move on and do a code review and then ultimately merge that pull request. Then we can use Travis to deploy to the rest of the environments from left to right. SIT first, which is Dev Pro environment. We'll do integration, testing, functional QA, mocks and stubs, Selenium, start data migration testing there with small volumes. Then UAT, which is a partial environment, user acceptance testing and end-to-end testing. Staging would be next with the full sandbox. We do performance testing and data migration, full volume test there, and then deploy to production and do smoke testing there. If there's production issues, we can use a hotfix environment as production support. That'll be a dev environment. If any issues are found along the way in any of these environments, they'll be fixed at the source in the Scratch org and promoted through this process again. And you can see an example of what the branching strategy would be likely to look like here. I'll skip the identity and conclude the presentation there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thanks, James. I want to start with, can you go to system landscape, please? Or system
Sure.
architecture diagram? So you made a few choices here for systems authenticating with Salesforce. For example, the user agent flow with OpenID Connect and JWT for ETL and ESP. Can you explain a little bit for each of these, why you choosing the flows that you choosing there? And if there is any other alternative you considered and why you went with what you chosen?
Yes, thank you for the question. User agent was the OAuth flow I used for the mobile apps. The reason being because they would not be able to securely store a secret. So I considered web server, but that would require them to store the client secret, and they cannot do that securely. And also the Salesforce, these sort of out of the box applications, user agent is what they use. It's we can't really change that. So to avoid custom work, I will just go with the default that they prescribe. For Jot, I use those for server to server integrations that don't involve a human actually as a user. With the reason being, we can use the exchange of certificates to build the trust between the two systems and avoid having to have a human actively manage the integration.
James, can you explain how the user agent flow works?
Sure. So first, the application will.
Sorry, James, you had a diagram. Did you have a diagram for flows? Any of these explained there that you wanted to use?
I drew the SP SAM initiated SAML and Jot, but the user agent I can just verbally describe if you like.
Yeah, that's fine.
So the application will request a token from the Salesforce authorization server, the token endpoint. This flow skips the authorization code and goes straight to requesting a token based on the redirect and callback URLs matching, and will provide the client ID and request back the token. The authorization server will send back the access token and optionally a refresh token, which can be used. With the access token can be used to call the Salesforce APIs to provide the experience and access to Salesforce data from the mobile app.
James, for the user agent flow, how do you set up that in Salesforce? Anything you do?
Salesforce, yeah, it would need a connected app with
Okay.
and the connected app would need the let me stop there. Did you have more question beyond that?
No, that's the question I had. Oh, do you have any questions? More?
Yes, but can you go back to the system landscape again, James?
Sure.
For the integration between ESP or ETL and Salesforce, you did mention that you need to use two-way SSL. Can you explain why we need two-way SSL and how it will be configured or enabled for Salesforce integrations?
Sure. As for why, it was my assumption that because this is a highly regulated industry and data security is paramount, it was my understanding that we would want to encrypt the data in transit. So how to set it up would be first we need to contact Salesforce to enable it as an option, and then assign the integration user that's used the permission to require them to use the port 8443 for any authentications.
Okay, thanks, James. Last question on this. I have seen ASP.ETL ahead of the firewall. Is this something that you meant or you want to explain?
Oh, that was just an assumption I made. It could just as easily be the ETL inside the firewall and the ESB sort of in the DMZ.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, James. James, you mentioned one of the reasons we are going with the ESP was to support the rollbacks. Can you explain to me in which scenarios you'll do a rollback and what is the end-to-end process?
Yeah. So an example would be integration 3, which involves multiple systems, let's say. So if we got as far as the final leg of it and Salesforce sent back some sort of error, and we wanted to maintain the sync between these two, we want to basically have an all or nothing transaction across multiple systems. The ESB would be able uh, to undo the previous things and let the user or an admin know that that needs to be retried if it can't recover from its own retry logic. If that fails, I mean.
Okay, so you are saying for when the audit is set to complete, and if the ESP cannot reach, say the downstream, we are gonna change the status back to non-complete.
I don't know if this is a great example of what the point I was trying to make. I don't know if we have a great example here, um, but just in general, yeah, an ESP could be used to if multiple systems are updated based on an event, and you want it to be both or all of them, or none at all, and reinitiate the integration. It can do that. Is what I was trying to say.
Okay, so what would be the user experience? How would the user know, like, okay, is my thing going to be rollback? Is it going to go successfully? How is the user going to be confident of this his work?
It if it is similar to like a request reply pattern, then we can just display them the message in the user interface. If it's more of a fire and forget, then they can be assured that it will be completed, and it wouldn't be handled by the user. It would be handled by the like ESB administrator that would go in and fix the error if it can't be recovered from.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Ram?
So can you go to your data model, please? Yeah, you mentioned that you want to use a custom object estimate rather than using the opportunity, and you had given the license as the reason, right? And because you have about 800,000 users, and that's why you don't want to use the partner community license. So maybe can you explain that a bit more?
Sure. I didn't see that so estimate is sort of doing the normal, some of the normal business processes that might appear on an opportunity. But I didn't think that we gained enough value from using the opportunity to justify 800,000 plus licenses to be upgraded, because we are not using things like team members. We're not using things like opportunity products here, or opportunity schedules, or splits. Any of those would maybe be a better justification for using opportunity. I didn't find any of those.
But we have got only 6,000 contractors, right? And contractors will be the one who would be basically working with the customers and the sales users as well.
Okay, my interpretation was all of these users would be interacting and needing to see the data that would be in that object. So that's why I came up with the 800,000 number. If it was just 6,000, that's a lot more manageable.
So do you change your solution?
My solution is currently built on the assumption that it's reliant on customers being able to access the data in this object. So I will stick to my current solution.
Just for the collaboration, right? Nothing else. They want to, because contractors wanted to speak to and collaborate with the customers, right? And you had two choices, whether you want to go with the custom object or whether you want to go with the opportunity. And if you want to go with the opportunity, then you will have to give them the partner community, which is costly. But they can collaborate on the account record as well, isn't it?
Yeah, that would do it as well. I think they also needed to see some files, so we could just create additional content document links to the account directly, and they could see the files under the account.
Okay, and also you have got a couple of other custom objects like installments, maintenance schedule, and you have the work order as well. So can you also explain that how are you creating these records and who would be owning those records, especially the custom objects, installation, maintenance, and work order?
Yeah. So the installation, once the order becomes completed, its status is controlled by the ERP. We'll be notified that the order is completed. The installation would be created at that point. That is something we can automate just with an after save flow to create the installation that looks up to the order and assign to the system specialist. That represents the work that the contractor is doing on site at the location. And then once the installation is complete, this scheduled maintenance or the maintenance schedule is created. It says it's set by the system specialist, so I'm assuming it's just created manually at that point by the system specialist. And then it's managed by the support center after that. So I'm assuming that they just assign a support rep as the owner.
So can you not use the same work order object for installation as well for contractors?
You could, yeah, you could use a different work or a different, just differentiated by record type or just a type field. Yeah, you could definitely use that object for that.
And what are you storing in maintenance schedule?
Maintenance schedule is basically just a collection of fields that automate the creation of work orders over time. So it's going to have things like a pick list field of how often that needs to happen, like monthly, quarterly, annually, weekly, etc. And then it'll keep track of the last maintenance date and the next maintenance date. And that can be used by we have a scheduled nightly flow, which will look up or it'll query the maintenance schedules that have a work order next scheduled date 7 days from then, and they create those work orders at that time based on that maintenance schedule. So it's really just a container for those fields.
So can those fields, if that is just a container, then can order become that container? If you can create more fields on the order itself and use that, because basically what you're using that you're having a batch class which is picking the value and creating work orders. So do we need a separate object for that, or can we store those fields on the order itself?
Yeah, you make a very good point. We could just collapse that and just add those fields to the order to do that logic. Yes.
Okay. you also have one custom object skill required, right? How are you using that skill required object? And you also have mentioned that in the solution you are using the Amazon service, Amazon Connect for routing, right? Based on the skill routing. So how are you utilizing this object along with Amazon Connect?
Yeah, so the skill requirement is just used for the skill-based routing, which is also used for the cases that get generated by the devices. So there's a whole cluster of objects, skill, service resource, skill, service resource that I didn't draw here, that sort of match and make sure that only people with the skills, all the skills that the case requires, can be assigned to that as the owner of that case by Omnichannel or Amazon Connect.
Yeah, but because you're doing the case assignment here, right? And for case only, Omnichannel does support this skill-based routing, and that does not require these objects. Skill required is not required for if you are using Omnichannel skill-based routing. Then Salesforce does give you that function, right? You can just create the service resource and you can utilize that. Do we need a skill required field here, a skill custom object here, just for the
Oh, no,
case routing?
I'm sorry. This wasn't supposed to be a custom object. I must have just forgotten the correct name of the object. Sorry about that. I meant to just symbolize skill-based routing with this.
Okay. Yeah. Do you guys have any other question on this?
Now I have a question on the next business process. Can go next. Can you go to contracting and installation section, requirement number 8. It's on page 6, where it says during installation, these devices record has to be created in Salesforce. You said that you're going to get the GPS and then figure out the location that way?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So what if that device is installed, like say on the fence of two companies? They have a device on the fence, which one belongs to this company, one for the other company. So how can you rely on the GPS location to figure out the location?
Okay. Yeah. In that case, that wouldn't work. Perhaps there's some other metadata that the device has that we can use to match it to a location, such as maybe a designated address or
Yeah. Assume they know the the serial number or the unique number of the asset. So how can you link to the customer or the location in Salesforce?
We can definitely create the asset record with the serial number.
Yeah, how do you link to the location of the customer?
I would think there has to be some sort of attribute in the monitoring system or device itself to allow us to identify the right location to link it to. So if it's not address and we can't use GPS, I'm sorry, I'm not thinking of what is that correct attribute to use.
Yeah, so what so in Salesforce you create the customer, what are the locations that they have, and then when you start to install, the design or the contractor is going to say, I'm going to install this device in this location, right? So that's the business process. How would you automate this entire process? And then in Salesforce, you know exactly when a customer calls in for this location, these are the equipment. Can you think about the overall process and how this could be integrated?
Yeah. Let me see. So if we, since Salesforce is the system that is initiating the order and adding order products, then and the ERP is ordering them, we should be able to get.
Yeah. Assume the ERP knows against which location this order is for. Can you go with that assumption?
Okay. Yeah. In that case, the ESB can get this. So the monitoring system will call the ESB, pass the device information, including the serial number. ESB can orchestrate a call to ERP to get the location info, and then do the remote call into Salesforce to create the asset, and using that info from the ERP, associate the correct location.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. What do you want to go next?
Yeah, I have a question while we're here, James, on location object. Did you assess any standard options for the object and disqualified for a reason? Can you explain a little bit more?
For location, I considered the location standard object that's well, originated from field service lightning, but that was a many-to-many with relationship with account. And in this scenario, in this project, my assumption is that locations are associated to only one account. So I thought that this data model would make it simpler with a custom object.
Isn't it possible to make it one-to-many instead of the current many-to-many relationship, or any obstacles you see there?
We could if there's a need for locations to be shared among many accounts. We could
No, I mean the
adapt.
other way around. Like, could you adapt, like, usually within many-to-many, you could use it as one-to-many if you want. It will not limit you. Is there any way that you could simplify the many-to-many out of the box and use it for what you identified here?
Yeah, we could use validation to prevent more than one junction record. No, sorry, that's not going to work. More than one junction record that looks up to, or multiple junction record that look up to different accounts. But maybe I think I'm misinterpreting your question, actually.
Oh, you said you did not go with the standard location object because it has many-to-many relationship with an account. And in your situation here, you need a one-to-many relationship. So my follow-up on that was, can we make the many-to-many out of the box work as a one-to-many and avoid the need to a custom object? Or do you see any obstacles in that?
Okay, thanks. Thanks for clarifying. So there would the many-to-many is the way that that's done is by having an object in the middle, a junction object for account location. Yes, there are ways that we could enforce one-to-many involving some validations, but in my opinion, it complicates the solution and wouldn't be justified, the extra effort required, and so that I didn't go with that approach.
Okay, thanks, James. Can we go to system landscape? I have a question there, and then another one on archiving. So you mentioned you will use SMS Magic here for SMS notifications. Is there any standard options that you assess?
Oh yeah, thank you. So I considered Marketing Cloud, but I thought it would be overkill for only one SMS use case, and I didn't see any bulk emailing of non-Salesforce records or Journey Builder, or I didn't see anything like that about campaigns, etc. So I thought it was overkill for the solution that we required.
Is there any core platform option or add-on out of the box Salesforce that you could consider as well?
I also considered digital engagement. To me, that was that also provides like social customer service, WhatsApp, and more additional functionality. So that's why I didn't go with that. I went with a simpler minimum sort of app that could meet our requirement.
Okay, thank you. You talked about archiving, and you will archive objects in case you will archive records and objects like case and others when it is closed, work orders, I guess you mentioned. Can you explain a little bit this archiving process, how it will work?
Right, I forgot to do that, sorry. So the ETL will define criteria for when they can be archived. So for now, it would be case closure or work order completion or task completion. The ETL would call into Salesforce with a nightly job via the bulk API and query records that met those predefined criteria for archival, save them into a data warehouse, and then call back into Salesforce with a bulk API hard delete of those same records.
You mentioned that you will do that once it is closed. Anything outside of close, like what if it's required for a bit of time in the Salesforce platform? How you will manage the triggering points and what you think should be considered before you goes archive?
Good point. Yeah, that was an assumption I made, but realistically, we need to talk to the business to define the retention window. So let's say if it's 90 days, we can change the query to timestamp when that closed happens, and then only archive ones where that is 90 or more days ago.
Okay, good point. Let's zoom out a little bit then. So you may need to manage a little bit for some time before you go ahead with archive, which may impact performance. Can you speak a little bit on what's your strategy will look like then for overall performance between archiving and any other options that you mentioned?
Sure. So if we need to keep them on platform longer, then we need to employ other mitigation strategies. So those would be things like using selective queries whenever possible in reports and list views for related lists that's sort of built in already. So we leverage filters on standard indexes and stay under the selectivity threshold for the query for the index. And then if we are filtering on other fields, we use Contact Salesforce to set up a custom index. It slows our writes, but does improve read performance. For case, we could, if we still have issues with performance, we could request a skinny table as well with the most commonly used fields. Yeah. We could also minimize synchronous logic on these objects that's triggered by these objects.
Okay. With that in mind then, and you discussing with the business and discussing retention, probably with IT as well, and you may end up with keeping some of the closed records either in case or work order for a bit of time. Will that impact your data migration strategy?
Yeah, so, oh, I forgot to call out one thing with data migration. So they requested 3 years of sales and service orders. I say okay with the sales orders, but service orders that'll give us over close to 11 million. My recommendation was to instead move this to the data warehouse and use an external object to surface that data. to prevent performance issues. We could consider similar strategies with case and task as well if they just historical ones need to be available for reference.
So I think you could talk about two options now. Keep it for some time in Salesforce and tune with some short-term options like the ones you mentioned, including skinny table indexes, etc., versus external objects. Can you rethink the whole process and make a final recommendation on short-term, long-term for what stay in Salesforce, what stay outside, and align also data migration to these so that we have some consistency?
Sure, thank you. So I will recommend going with this external object approach for reference data that's no longer operational. We're not triggering logic off of it. We don't need to really update it at all. It's mostly just used for read purposes. So after a certain amount of time goes by after they're closed or completed, we can archive them as I previously mentioned, but the difference being we can still expose them using OData as external objects so that the users can still go find them and reference them when needed.
With that choice, then, what is the impact on data access with external objects and the data access you made on case and work orders? How will you still apply the same concepts on exposure of external objects?
Yeah, so I've made a large assumption I forgot to state there. So external objects don't have sharing. So if there's sensitive info, we can disable reporting and search. Then they can only people who have access to the related account or the related record can see them via the related list. But we have a risk where if somebody emails or Slacks a direct link to a record, we can't prevent anyone from accessing that. So my assumption is that's an acceptable level of security for the sensitivity of the data in those objects. If not, then we can't use external objects, or we'd have to, I would go with a different approach if that's not acceptable.
Okay, thank you. Last question on external objects. You said you will do this in data warehouse. How you will make this data in data warehouse available in Salesforce as an external object?
We can. My assumption is the data warehouse can work with OData. But if not, we can use the ESB as an OData layer over the data warehouse. We would set up an external data source in Salesforce and then define an external object with the columns being fields.
Okay, thanks, James. Ram, Moruna, have any other question?
Yeah, I have one question. So it says that at present the PDF files are stored in the local laptops and desktops. So can you explain to me how we're gonna, what is the plan for them to be loaded to the new system?
Yeah. First, we need to centralize those. So we need to get a campaign going to get the system specialists who have these on their machines to all save them in a centralized location, such as a shared drive, and also rename the files according to a naming convention. I'm recommending using the ERP order ID, as that should be available since we're already using that same ERP. We'd have that as an external ID on the Salesforce order ID, Salesforce order, and we'll get that as part of our data migration, and then we can use that to match and associate the uploaded design docs to the correct record in Salesforce using that shared ID.
Okay, all right, thank you. We have like 20 seconds to go around. You have questions?
Yeah, so under the visibility and accessibility requirement, at one place there is a requirement where you have used external account hierarchy, where you had an assumption that only the account and the related locations should be visible. What if your assumptions are not correct? If they also want to see all the related customer object data and everything, what would be your solution for that?
If it's all these objects, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, so the main challenge there is that sharing set data shared by sharing sets don't roll up via the external account hierarchy. So we would need to use a different sharing mechanism, such as a Lightning Web component without sharing, in order to define which records they would have access to based on the structure of the external account hierarchy.